We recognize COVID is still a thing, and we'll just have to deal with whatever changes come along through the year. And if the board thinks we need to recommend an amended budget, we will do that. We have about $74,000 to spend, and so that is comparable to a typical year. The next item is quite important. If you could just scroll up, Paul, to the line that starts with $20,000. So we have a considerable amount, and I'll provide details in a moment, in our club account. So again, I'll talk a little bit more for new members who don't know, or for longer term members who have forgotten this. We have two accounts. We have a club account that runs the club. We have a service account. That's where donor money goes, and we give money away out of the service account. But over the years in the club account, we have quite a surplus. And so the board is recommending that we distribute $20,000 of this surplus. And you'll see details in a minute. We're suggesting that the International Committee receive $10,000 and the Community Outreach Grant folks receive $10,000, and there'll be more details in that. At the very bottom of that, Paul, there's some dates. And so we're presenting this. This was distributed last week. And can I just there was some confusion of whether or not people actually received the email. Did everybody receive it? I've had a few questions. So I think it's gone out. It has gone out. People have received it. It's important that you did get it on July 7th, because we have a vote 2 weeks after that date. And so we're presenting it today for questions and answers. And we're also, there's a note there that the vote is on the 21st. So Paul, the next tab, please, principles. So there are principles, and they're just a higher level of what's important. And you can go to the top of that, please, Paul. There's lots of competing priorities, and we're just going to use the four-way test to decide what is best. There is, in number 2 there, some information about the 2 separate corporations, and you can see that. I'm not going to read this all the way through. There's just not enough time, but I hope there's enough highlights I'm giving you that you can open it yourself and look through these, whatever points you are more interested in. We do receive grants, and just last week we received $2,500 from the district. So one of the privileges we have in paying Rotary dues is that we are eligible to receive grants. And we don't have anything in the budget. It's not automatic that we will receive a grant, but you should know that we will apply for grants anytime we can. We will do our best to maintain a high level of integrity in the budget, which means if there's dollars in a certain line of the budget, we're not going to move them to a different line just because it might be convenient. We're going to make sure that we honor the integrity of the budget. We no longer pay a stipend to the treasurer or the secretary. And in past budgets, the last couple of years, we've had centennial money and COVID money that are for all the clubs in Kingston. We don't have that anymore. We'll have a small deficit. We do have a small deficit in the club account, but the service account is budgeted to be a break even. So we go to the next tab, all the assumptions on the club account. So we assume the dues this year are $275. In fact, you've all received your invoice for that amount. We approved that amount, that dollar amount, the $275. We approved it in last year's budget because to send out the invoices for whatever the amount is, it has to be approved by the club. So the amount was approved last year, $275, and you'll see in this budget, it's approved for $285 for next year. That doesn't necessarily mean the board will implement that, but if the board decides to, the number has been approved. We send out the annual invoices, which you've now done, and that's an effort to have invoices paid, the actual membership on July 1st to be accurate. because RI sends out their invoice to us based on our membership number as at July 1. I've talked about applying for grants. We're assuming there are 80 members in the club. And if you're at number 5, of the $275 in club dues, in summary, there's a bunch of arithmetic there you can read, but in summary, the club account will have only about $80 to spend on the actual running of the club. So our biggest number by far in the club account, biggest expense, is RI dues and district dues. We have a number of honorary members. The long and the short of this is it doesn't cost us very much money to have an honorary member. There were a couple of questions, and I wanted to be clear on this. Fellowship now includes retention activities. In the past, Darlene and Dave have been very generous in contributing personally to some of the fellowship activities. And it is my personal view, and the board actually shares this, that the club should cover our own costs. If Darlene and Dave wish to make a donation, they're absolutely welcome to do that. Many people in the club do make donations. And if they want to make a donation, they're welcome to do that, and they should receive a tax receipt. Membership includes a little bit of marketing. And we continue to use Club Runner. So there's a budget number there. We're going to have hybrid meetings probably throughout this year. This is today is an excellent example of a hybrid. Some people in the room, some people on Zoom. No obligation to do one or the other. Every member is welcome to do whatever suits their own personal situation. Speaker thanks is a service expense. Club and community awards covers the cost of the meals of awardees plus all of the presentation material. Scottish Curlers is going to happen this year. In Alicia's year, we're at number 15. You've already seen on your dues, there's a dues amount, and then there are optional amounts that we have asked people to consider. We continue to provide a hard copy roster, and much of the cost of that is covered by ads in the roster. HST, we get most of it back. And as I mentioned a minute ago, for Matt's year next year, the dues are recommended to be $285. And I want to spend a little bit of time on number 19. So this is what I mentioned a moment ago, that there's quite a surplus in our club account. The surplus is about $31,000, and there's a bit of a deficit there that'll reduce it to $27,000. I'm not sure if that's actually right, but that's what that is. And out of that surplus, we're suggesting that $10,000 be allocated to international work and $10,000 be allocated to community work in Kingston. And we're asking each of the relevant committees to come to the board with a proposal as to how they would spend that money. And that doesn't necessarily have to be spent in this current year. It may be something they decide to think about for a year and spend it in following years. But in any case, it is a reasonable chunk of money, quite a good chunk of money. And so we're asking that those committees come to the board for board approval. And there will be communication with the club as to what the plans are, but not necessarily going to a club vote. So I'm going to pause there, and I'm going to ask for any questions on either the title page, the tab for the title, the tab for principles, or the tab for assumptions for the club account. Do you have any questions? And who's watching for questions? Lindsay Foster, I see your hand up. Lindsay, go ahead.
I think I'm unmuted. Hi, Peter. Thank you. I'm just curious, the club account, how did we get to that level of a surplus with the club account? And it hasn't been considered that that would be applied to possibly lowering the membership dues annually.
So that's a very good question, Lindsay. Thank you for that. So if you've been paying attention for the last 30 or 40 years, the club account has always had a budget that was essentially break even. So how on earth did, out of all those years of break-even budgets, did we get such a huge surplus? And I'm going to say that was just good luck, not good management. And so just for a whole variety of reasons, we put money in the budget, in the club account that just was not spent. And at some point, well, now is the point where that has added up to be such a worthwhile amount, such a significant amount, that the board has thought that we should use that money to benefit the community. So why don't we reduce dues? Basically, because this is 2023 and we should pay our costs of running the club. The surplus, the cumulative surplus has accumulated over the last 40 years. And it's my personal thought, and the board in discussion, we had quite a discussion on this, is thinking the same thing. Money we saved by not spending it 10, 20, 30 years ago should not really go to the benefit of the members next year or the year after that. That our recommendation to the club is that that money benefit the community, both the local community and the international community. And a question from Bill Beattie.
So, Peter, what is the board proposing to put in place to make sure this doesn't happen again?
The budget is what the budget is. So we've looked at the items in the budget carefully, and we come up with this year's a small deficit. We still have 7,000. After this, we'll still have $710,000. So I think the plan will always be to spend money carefully. Just because money's in the budget, we're not going to spend it. But I think what will boards over the coming years, if the money starts to accumulate, we won't let it accumulate to the level of $30,000.
But shouldn't there be a best practice that says once it gets to a certain amount, there'll be a discussion at the board as to what we're going to do with that? I don't care.
So
if it's 3,000, 5,000, but certainly 30,000 is spent.
There's no question. So the question, I didn't hand the mic to Bill. So for the people who didn't hear that, should there not be a best practice that says when that surplus reaches a certain level, should we not have that? Should that not trigger some action by the board? And that's I think a good suggestion, Bill. And if the board, as we're preparing next year's budget, we want to think about having a threshold where if it gets over a certain amount, we trigger an action. I think that's worthwhile for the board to put in place and have that practice for next year.
Peter. This is Paul. The other point to make too is that the dues will be set without that same principle in mind. That is to say, we won't raise it to 285 if it's going to generate potentially a surplus. So I think that's a further check on the system.
So, are there any further questions? I don't see any hands raised. I can't see everybody's face on the screen, but if you're on Zoom and you have a question,
Just raise hand.
raise hand, or I see a chat. I don't see the content of the chat. Do we know
we have
what?
to go in and look at it. Can we do that, Paul, or should I do that?
Lisa will have to track it for us.
Okay.
So I'm
Just
going
ask
to
Lisa,
carry.
Lisa to check the chat.
Lisa, I'm being asked to ask you to check the chat, and if there's a question, could you please let us know? I see that chat has just turned to number 3. So I'm going to carry on. If there is a question, I'll certainly back up.
There is a chat question from Victoria.
Okay, Vicky, thank you.
Hi, I'm not sure. I'm going to put the question out, and perhaps maybe the response has to follow up privately, but I understand that everybody does, that the surplus was accumulated over multiple years, over a long-term period. There was a period of time that my company made a personal donation to Rotary, a fairly sizable one. And I'm not going to remember the exact year. It was certainly more than 5 years ago, but it was during a time that the club was experiencing a deficit in the budget. my intention was, to designate the funds for a purpose, which at the time was scholarship or bursary for boys and, for RKY campers. So camperships for those in financial need. I was asked by the president and presumably the board at the time if it could be undesignated because of the financial situation of the club. They were fairly open to it. I'm not concerned about that questioning, but I'm just wondering, I didn't actually, and I didn't ask for it, ask how that related to a deficit year. Well, presumably there was this financial surplus because it was all certainly less than 10 years ago. So it doesn't need to be answered right now, but I guess there is a question of where those funds are allocated separately from club surplus.
We're happy to answer it.
Yeah, so I just hearing Alicia say we're happy to answer it, and I am. So first of all, Vicki, I think at the time the club expressed our sincere appreciation for your donation, and I would just want to repeat that. It was a significant amount of money, and Vicki chose to direct that to our club rather than any other choices she might have had. This comes back to the question, and it does take, you have to pause a bit and think, what of the two club accounts are we talking about? So this surplus that I'm discussing now is in the club account. This is the account that we run the club with that money. Your dues go into that account, and we run, and you do not receive a tax receipt for money given to the club account. We have a separate account, separate corporation, separate banking, and that is called the Rotary Club of Kingston service account. And if you donate to that account, you receive a tax receipt. So Vicki, your money went into the service account, and not to get too technical, but her money didn't need to go into an account that had a charitable status. So at that time, there were some challenges in the service account, and we were trying to maintain our regular level of giving to the community, making donations back to the community. And at the same time, I don't know for a fact, but at the same time, there must have been a surplus in the club account. So for whatever reason at that time, the club did not decide to move the money as we are now doing, we're now recommending. The money, there was a surplus, there must have been, I can do the research if you'd asked me to, there must have been a surplus. It would have been a lot less than $30,000 in the club account, but we were anxious to be able to maintain our regular typical level of giving in the service account.
Very good. And I do want to make clear, I am not questioning the very astute and careful process that our treasurers undertake in the board. It was more just a general question so I can understand the allocation of donations and what you just explained in terms of club account versus service account. And I stand corrected. It was in fact not the club that asked if it could go towards a general operations cost. It was actually RKY that asked me that, not our club. So.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
I see our chat has moved to 4, but just before I go to there, I just want to pause. Vicki is just as I said, that she seems satisfied with the response. I'm just hoping
Yes.
that others are. Is there a follow-up question to Vicki's question?
Just Peter, a follow-up comment.
Paul has a follow-up comment.
And Vicki, just so you know, we have made it an annual priority to fund camperships.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's $6,000 each year that's allocated to the purpose that you had intended some money to go to.
That's great. Yes, yes. And I'm sorry I even suggested that the board had asked that. It was RKY that asked me that.
All good, Vicki. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to close off this session with again expressing the club's thanks to Vicki.
Oh, and that's not necessary.
I know you're would be shy about that recognition, but it was an important donation, and we want to make sure the club recognizes that we appreciate it. Lisa, I'm seeing a number 4 in the chat. Is there another question in the chat?
There is. So Lloyd asked, is it possible to condition the $10,000 international distribution that it be multiplied through district and RI grants to leverage our impact?
So Lloyd, thanks for that question. That's an excellent question. So the board had some discussion of this, and we also had some discussion with the International Committee. And at one point, the board was suggesting that however that money was to be spent would go to a vote of the club rather than just have approval of the board. And in those discussions with the International Committee, it is very, very clear to the board that committee will maximize our ability to raise funds through either district grants or international grants. This has been a multi-year process for our club to put place an increasing level of attention to international projects, and that has required members of this club to take the district courses on the granting process, and to obtain a grant, a district grant, you need a certain level of courses. There are a certain number of people to have taken that, and to obtain an RI grant, you need other courses or other number of people. So Lloyd, the answer to that is the board is not recommending that we condition it, but without doubt, the committee will maximize the RI grants that they can obtain. And I would say, in discussion with Pete and Carol, they're going to maximize grants from other sources.
And they have to be sustainable.
Right.
Sustainable projects.
Right. So when you go back to that assumption, one of the words in that is what Alicia's just emphasized. The board is asking. The board will not be approving the use of that $10,000 unless they're directed to sustainable projects. So if we go to the next one is assumptions of the service account. So there are two things that are fairly complicated. I've been treasurer for a few years, and I still get tricked in this budget, in all of our finances. One is that we have two corporations, and I think we've covered that. The other is that we have slip funding in our service account. So this was actually put in place, funny enough, when I was president the first time around, 25 or more years ago, because what happened in the years before that, we raised money through the year, spent money through the year, but at the end of the year, we didn't know if we raised enough money to cover what we'd already spent. And so what this club did was we raised, over the 3 or 4 years, we raised an extra year's worth of money, which quite frankly, we did by going to bingos. So if you see a member that's got sort of 25 or 30 years on, pat them on the back and say, thanks for doing all that bingo work. But anyway, that got us a year ahead. So now, the money that Alicia has to spend, or the club has to spend during Alicia's year, we raised in Elzabe's year. And so the money in this budget, the revenue in the budget I'm showing you today, the revenue in this budget will be spent in Matt's year.
Matt's gonna have a good year.
So Matt's going to have a good year. So when you look at the numbers, and I quite frankly, I'm not going to get to showing you any numbers today. We're going to go all through the assumptions, and then the numbers just fall into place. Another little bit of a twist this year is the Cat for Kids was originally, the Cat for Kids tournament was originally scheduled in May. The Cat Club had problems, Ken, with their greens or something, right? So it wasn't going to be a good showing for a tournament that's set to raise a lot of money. So the tournament organizing committee decided to postpone the tournament to the 18th, coming up Monday. So for the sake of 18 days, the board has made the decision the money raised on that tournament falls back into the prior year, where it was going to be when the tournament was held in May. So 1A is a summary of the money that was raised in Elsie's year. Cash Calendars continues to be a major success. We want to thank Marcy and Kathy for their work with Behind the Mask. It raised $20,000. And then there's a variety of others that adds up to about $73,000. In number 2, and the point of that is that's about the same as prior years. Item 3 covers slip funding again. And in 4, there's a comment, there's more members. More members bring more aspirations for both fundraising and spending. And when we prepared this budget a few months ago, inflation was kind of 3, 2, 3, 4, 5%. It's now kind of scary. We're budgeting for hybrid meetings. So item 7 covers a bunch of the revenue projections. And so as I say, this revenue will benefit the club during Matt's year. We have a gala, and in alternate years, we have an event called Giggles, Grapes, and Brew. The gala raises a ton of money. Giggles, Grapes, and Brew, not so much. So to even that out, that's a 2-year cycle. The gala, Giggles, Grapes, and Brew. To even that out, 50% of each of those totals gets carried forward. So if you want me to explain it more, I will privately, but it's just to even that money out. Talked about the Cat for Kids already. There's some other events like the Neil Dick Breakfast and Wine Tour may or may not be held in Alicia's year, but we've assumed no revenue from there to a great extent, a fellowship activity. We've established a new initiatives committee, so we're at 7E. So we will continue to have auctions, a comedy night, Chase the Ace. Chase the Ace is a Ontario-wide Chase the Ace that we're budgeting. We're part of that. Not every club in Ontario is part of it, but we are. The Kingston Fair Park. So Darlene has slipped out, but through Darlene's contacts with the fair folks, the Fall Fair has asked our club to assist with the parking. So we will have members at the gates. All we're going to do is receive money. We're not going to sell anything. We're not going to check ID or anything like that. We're just going to receive money for parking. And for that, we budgeted $5,000.
But Peter, can I just say it's 10,000 and over, but we don't get enough volunteers from our club. So the fair board has agreed to give us 10,000 and even more, depending on their attendance, but 10,000 for sure. That's a given. And we could get more depending on the attendance at the fair this year. However, if we have to bring in other volunteers because our club we can't get enough volunteers from our own club, then we'll reach out to the other clubs and other partners to make it happen, because this could be a sustainable fundraiser knowing we could get $10,000 every year. But our struggle, of course, like any organization, is getting enough volunteers. So that's why Peter put 5,000 in there in case we have to give up some.
And Anna, get your question just more. Members who've got a little history with the club will remember that we park cars for the international.
So we're not parking, we're collecting money.
And my point is, we're not doing that. We're not doing that much work.
No, here's what we're doing. We're standing there and
standing
saying,
there with an apron on. People are going to give us $10.
and I got the aprons. I got them from somebody.
And
I'm saying to be absolutely accurate, you're collecting money for admission.
exactly.
Parking included, but it's admission.
Right. So Anne has made the point to clarify, so thank you, Anne, for that. We're receiving money that includes the cars being parked and people being admitted to the fair. We're not selling tickets for rides, or it's pretty simple. But simple is several days of the fair running for whatever number of hours it is.
Think of the immunization clinic. That's what I think of.
Yeah, we just need a lot of horsepower to make it happen. And the reason I didn't put $10,000 in, because we might have to share that money with whoever else we approach.
When is this, Peter?
September or whatever, but it's
16, 17, 18.
Yeah.
Is that right, Ann?
so.
Yeah.
So middle of September. September is without question is a busy month for our club. And so we're looking for folks for nut drives and the fall parking and all kinds of stuff. Then number 8, the next few assumptions deal with expense projections. And it's important here for the members to recognize that these numbers have been put together in discussion with each of the directors, who in turn has had discussions with their committees. I don't think there's anything controversial in these numbers. I would invite you to look at them on your own. Youth exchanges are back. We continue to support programs, Rotaract, Interact, and so on. Easter Seals is a program that we've been involved with for 100 years, and we continue to be. There's a special trust grant. We're bringing back a small amount for the board discretionary fund, just to give the board the ability to react to some urgent need without going to the club. And also in 8E, we've considered taking money from our accumulated surplus or taking an advance on that, and we're not doing that this year. There's no question that COVID caused us to do a little bit of gymnastics over the last couple of years. This year, we're at the stage where our revenue covers, money raised in Elsby's year covers what we need to spend, what we want to spend in at least this year. So all the committees should know, and I think they all do know now, that whenever they're raising money for a certain, for a club event, that money goes to the general purposes of the club. A few years ago, the club got, I don't want to say in trouble, but the club got in a little bit of a pickle because some committees would go and raise money to be used only for their own activities. And so we had a whole lot of club resources being directed to raising money that was already, quote unquote, already spent. So now the policy of the club is all fundraising activities, the revenue goes to the benefit of the overall club, unless the board has approved this in advance. And the board has approved, and by passing this budget, the club will approve. Cheers the beef, the money goes to Boys and Girls Club, BGC, I guess. And I think, oh, and the other is special fundraisers for RI. And I think if we have special fundraisers for Polio Plus, that money goes to Polio Plus. Number 10, there has been a suggestion that we consider establishing a micro loan program. And so a micro loan program is where an organization or perhaps an individual gives a very small amount of money, sometimes $25,000. Micro loan programs typically for that level operate in a developing country somewhere, but it may be here, the amount would be say $1,000. So the board is going to put some thought to that. It is not in this year's budget, but just as a heads up to the club, if anybody has an interest in that program, the board would be interested in hearing from it. HST, we get most of it back. This year again, on the budget, we record the trust funds. There really is no budget for the trust funds. Whatever money they raise from our investments, that's the money they spend. So just to go back, this didn't go away anymore, but anyway, underneath here, We've covered the title page, the principles, assumptions of the club account, assumptions of the service account. The next two tabs have the numbers. And I'm not going to present it. What's our time like?
You're good.
1 o'clock.
You're good.
I'm not proposing that we look at the numbers. As I said through it earlier, based on the assumptions, all the numbers just fall into place. So in the club account, we have a small deficit. The 285 doesn't quite cover, but it's close. In the service, we do have a very small surplus. So what I would propose now is to answer questions, try to address them. I'll try to answer them. I'll certainly address them. And then I'll remind you that the vote is 2 weeks.
1 week.
1 week. 2 weeks from the release of the budget, which was on the 7th, and the vote is next week. And while I'm just waiting for questions, what I would very much appreciate is if anybody has a question, send me an email in the next few days, and I'll address it. And then when it comes to the vote next week, I can summarize any questions and provide the answers. But hopefully the vote next week will just be a 2-minute venture if people have
Well,
brought
this-
their questions to me before.
yeah, this is the time to ask the questions.
Right.
We're not going to be answering, we're not asking any questions on the 21st. I just want to be clear about that. We will go to vote on the 21st.
And
So.
that's not to say, well, that is to say, quite literally, if you have a question, I'm absolutely willing and I'll do my very best to answer it. I just would prefer not to do it at 12:15 next week.
You won't do it.
Peter, I have a question for you.
So we have a question for Paul, and then I see our chat is at number 5. So Lisa, I'll come back to you for any questions on there.
What is the current surplus in the service account?
In the service account. So thanks, Paul. So the question is, what is the surplus in the service account? So not the club account, but the service account. So a couple of years ago, when we were approaching the centennial, the surplus was huge, like $100,000. And so as part of the centennial, we decided to spend that money on centennial activities. And was it 80,000 we spent or 100,000?
It was 80. I think the total at the time was about 130, if I
Right.
recall.
So there continues to be, after having spending $80,000 directed specifically to centennial activities, there continues to be a surplus in the service account, and more or less it is 1 year's spent. Because the surplus we have now with the slip funding, the idea of the slip funding is if the club ceased to stop for whatever reason, if all our fundraising failed for whatever reason, like a COVID situation, we have enough money to carry on for another year to support the community the way we would like. And during that year, figure out how we're going to get ourselves back to being sustainable. So the COVID situation was exactly what the board had envisioned 25 years ago. So it did take us 2 or 3 years, Paul's year, and to some extent my year. Fundraising was very difficult. Gal was postponed, lots of stuff was postponed. But because we had a year's worth of money sitting there, which is roughly what we have now. Lisa, are there questions from?
No, there are none in the chat.
Okay, great. So going once, going twice, going 3 times for questions. Are there any further questions? Denny.
Sort of off the topic. It's for things that we as members.
Just a second, I'm going to come over with the microphone.
My question is sort of related to the whole budget. It has to do with the income tax forms that we get for contributions that we make to events. Is that being held to the end of the calendar year, or are they being given adjacent to the event itself?
That is a good question and an important question, so thank you for raising it. So first of all, the question revolves around when a member makes a donation, they do receive a tax receipt. But there are a couple things that apply for that. One, they do need to make their donation to the service account. Our service account is a charitable corporation. Our club account is not. So when you pay a fine or a happy buck, you do not receive tax receipt for that contribution. You're helping the club run, but you don't get a tax receipt. When you make a charitable donation, just so for example, in lieu of meals, people have been sending a donation to the club. There are a few people that do it very regularly. Send me as treasurer, send the club $20 a week or whatever their amount is, and they call it a donation to the service. They receive a tax receipt for that. When you attend an event, such as the comedy night, you are receiving benefit for your ticket. So the comedy night is a good example. The tickets are $40, right, Paul?
Yeah.
40?
Yeah, 40.
So you paid $40 for your ticket. Club, Paul and his organizing committee determined that the value of that ticket was $20. So we are able to go to CRA, the revenue agency, and support that what you paid for was a $20 ticket to the comedy night and a $20 donation. So you get a tax receipt for the $20. And similarly for the gala, you're going to pay $150, I think, is for a ticket, $175, and the value of what you're getting, I think we've determined to be $125 for getting a $50 donation, right? I think so. But the point is, when you attend an event, you're getting value for the event, and that extra is the donation. And those donations are all going out at the end of the year, in January, February. And I'm going to be quite clear, that is just me being selfish, because rather than me sending out tax receipts every week or every month, Andre, and before Andre, Trevor was very helpful. We've now got a little, it's just stretching a mile long, that whenever somebody sends me money, I plug that in, it adds it all up, and at the end of the year, your receipt goes out electronically, and you get one receipt rather than me doing so many of them. So I'm just a selfish kind of guy.
I see Lindsay's got her hand up.
Yeah, and I think Bob's got a question here. So Lindsay, you go first.
Okay, sorry, just trying to turn everything on again. Thank you, Peter. This is, an amazing job. I don't know how you and Martin have done this. Like just the numbers hurt my head. But I had a concern last year that I expressed, and that I wasn't there for the vote, and it just sort of went away. But I would like to reemphasize my concern for a couple of things under the service account. As as a co-chair of the community outreach grants, like the more money, the better, as far as I'm concerned. But I'm trying not to be biased in that one. Yeah, trying. But when I look at the camper shifts, and that's something that if the funds were allocated during the pandemic, I'm curious where that money went, because there was no camp, number one. And this ongoing commitment of $6,000, and it turns out that it's being decided by the community outreach grants. Another thing that Paul Elsley does is coordinating and getting the word out. So I'm wondering why that's not combined with the community outreach grants, and we can promote that as part of the call to the community, the call for applications, that a portion of it will be allocated to camperships. That's my first question. And my second question, again, is a concern about Easter seals. And this is, the budget has continued to increase for Easter seals when we don't have any line items for RKY or Boys and Girls Club, but Easter Seals just keeps on going up. And I have nothing against Easter Seals, nothing whatsoever. I know we have a very dedicated committee, but that dedicated committee does a lot of work for Easter Seals. And I'm wondering what Easter Seals does in return. They rely on our Rotary Club and other Rotary clubs to do a lot of their job, and we just keep on giving them money. And again, money well spent. I have nothing against Easter Seals and the services they provide, but it just doesn't make sense when we as a club a couple of years ago voted to remove those legacy organizations from as line items on in our budget. Sorry. I know, just shake your head, roll your eyes. I know you're all doing that, but I have to say it.
I can speak to that. If I may have the floor, I think it was $5,800 last year was the line item, and it was not a lot. We brought it down. And of course, the money stays local.
Yeah, and I appreciate, but for me, it's more of the Easter Seals has one staff member and relies heavily and has for years. And I'm wondering why they don't have more staff and doing that. And I'm wondering why our club is continuing to.
You shut yourself off, Lindsay, sorry.
I'm just wondering why, like we used to cover the launch and that was it, like the launch of Easter Seals Month. But then it's just going, we're paying for ads, we're doing this, we're doing that. And it's like, why isn't Easter Seals stepping in and providing either more people power or more funding?
Yeah. Alicia, you're off. Alicia, if you're just trying to speak, we can't hear you.
So are people hearing me?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, I love the passion. Okay, Peter, yes, Peter, I will let Peter answer this question. I have a few comments, but I will let Peter answer this question. Okay, everybody, listen, thank you.
So Lindsay has raised an absolutely legitimate and absolute.
Kingsbridge, we can't hear you.
Okay, just are you going to test again?
Now we can hear you. Thank you.
You hear me? Thank you. Thanks for letting me know that. So there's no question that Lindsay has asked an absolutely appropriate and legitimate question. Every committee, not just the Community Outreach Grant Committee, that I know is a very popular and a very worthwhile committee and does excellent work. Every committee wants more money. And so the issue, this is the issue the board faces. And I am asking you to have comfort and confidence that your board has considered all of these options. And when we put the wish list in front of all the directors and that wish list came to the board, virtually every committee had a reduction to its budget. But certainly to make the budget balance, the board had to look at all of these issues. So I want you to know that this is not Peter Merley's budget. This is the full board's budget based on lengthy discussions. The email I sent to you, or that was sent to you, recorded this budget as being the final version. In the process, we had 10 or 11 versions of this budget that went to the board. Each version hammered out, each version discussed with the directors involved, and this is the budget we're presenting to the board. the RKY camper ships. At one point, the history of the camper ships was those were camper ships only for RKY. That was based on our long association with RKY. The R in RKY is Rotary. And the vote to move away from the legacy projects, I don't know if it was a vote to take each one out of a line item, but there's no question RKY, Easter Seals, Boys and Girls Club do not receive nearly the level of support that they used to from this club. So the vote that was taken to do that, the board is following the intent of that vote. I can't speak off the top of my head to the actual precise numbers of it, but there's no question your board is following the intent of that vote. So where RKY used to get a significant amount of money, Easter Seals used to get a significant amount of money, Boys and Girls Club, they do not get nearly that level of money. And one of the reasons when we discussed what are we going to do with, what might we do with the surplus in the club account? The community outreach grant program came to the top of that community program. International got half, local community got half. But after much discussion with the board, that wasn't just given to the entire program of local community. The board is recommending that $10,000 go to the community outreach grant program. And if
We got 5 minutes because I have a few other things.
if the RKY camper ships have fallen under the community outreach grant, that's a matter of convenience. And there's no, I don't care where that money, how it gets decided. But the camper ships are no longer just RKY. It is any camp can apply. So Boys and Girls Club applies, Easter Seals applies, RKY. We make sure those 3 organizations know that program and invite them to apply. But any other camper ship, any other camp can as well.
Yeah, like Camp Outlook.
Camp Out, that's well.
Okay, one more question.
So
Todd, Todd, if you want to make this, you're supposed to be fines master and Happy Bucks. I have one important thing I need to deal with before we end this meeting. So we can skip fines today. That's no problem in Happy Bucks. So Todd, one more question and then we need to move on.
Okay, well, actually, I just wanted to, and I don't want to dwell on this, but I just wanted to respond. We have an Easter Seals committee. We don't have an RKY or a Boys and Girls Club committee. That budget is to support the committee. As part of this tightening, we did reduce it this year by $400, not increase it. And part of that is the kickoff luncheon, which is really a club event, and $1,500 of that $3,400 budget is actually the Rotary Club of Kingston's ad during Easter Seals month on CKWS. So it's actually promotional money, not really for the committee. We've just assigned it to the committee, but it's promoting our club. That's it.
Thanks, Todd. That was brief.
So to recap, we have a club budget that is in a little bit of a deficit. We have a service budget that is at break even. And this is the budget your board is recommending to you.